Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and I am so pleased to be here. It's, as we all know, a wonderful organization, and I was so pleased and inspired by last night that I decided to do something different than I was planning. So I was inspired by John last night and Larry Keeley and Teddy Blanks, and we'll do a rant. So I am going to rant about something just for fun of it, and John, you should feel free to come up the ramp and stop the rant whenever. I want to rant about the two words that are most deadly to innovation, the two innovation-killing words in our vocabulary. And those two words are prove and it, in that order. It is a very useful word. We use it in many sentences and has utility. But when we put it next to prove, we kill innovation. So my rant is about how if you want innovation, you need to ban the use of those two words in your organization. Now, why have we gotten into this situation where prove it is so deadly is because as the world has had the success of science, right, in healthcare we get insulin and we get penicillin and we get stents and we get organ transplants, and as in the rest of the world we get transistors and semiconductors and the internet. What we've, I think, done is decided that just as if we eat a chocolate fudge brownie and decide it's the tastiest thing we've had in a while, we go on a diet of 100% chocolate fudge brownies. We've decided that because science has produced great things, we need to be massively scientific all the time. And what that's come to mean, I believe, in organizations, whether they be healthcare organizations or business organizations or other organizations, is that if you're going to be a modern, rigorous person, you have to be analytical and you have to prove whatever you're doing. You have to prove it. Now, what does it mean to prove something? Well, it turns out that it means that you use one of two forms of logic to declare a proposition to be true or not in advance. One of those forms of logic is deductive logic, applying a general rule that we all know to be true to a specific situation in order to be able to declare whether this proposition is true or false. So this is where John, in his speech, and sorry for those of you who weren't here last night, gave this wonderful little talk about his history of having a family after having his spinal cord injury. And the doctors told him, using their deductive logic, right, this general rule that somebody with your specific condition will not be able to have children. Thank you very much. You're done. Or you can use inductive logic, which is to say to reason from the specific situations to develop a general rule. So John, I'm sorry, all the people who've been in your situation that we've observed before have not been able to have children, so you won't either, right? Those are the two forms of logic that we use to declare things to be true or not. Now, the interesting thing about those two forms of logic, right, is that they use the past, right, a general rule passed down from who knows how far back, or a whole bunch of situations that have happened already, to extrapolate into the future. There's a few challenges to that. One is, if you actually want to innovate and create something different than we currently have, extrapolating the future from the past ain't exactly going to do it for you. The other challenge, of course, is that the future is not always similar to the past. So imagine, for a moment, you are a turkey, and you were born in the spring, and every morning the farmer comes with a bag of feed and feeds you. every single day, the farmer every morning comes and feeds you with his bag of feed. And you reason inductively, because you're a smart turkey, that that farmer is going to feed me every day. And he is a nice man with his bag of feed and fills my belly. And so you're being very logical. But then, the morning of the last Thursday in November, the farmer comes to you, but he doesn't have a bag of feed. He has an axe, and he chops your head off, and you end up being Thanksgiving meal. Right? The future is not always an extrapolation of the past, which the turkey finds out a little bit too late to do anything about it. So if we're going to innovate, right, the question is, can we do what is considered to be scientific in the modern world, which is to use inductive and deductive logic to declare a proposition true or false? The answer, I believe, is no. No, we can't. If we want to actually innovate, we have to be comfortable with a different form of logic, a form of logic that is not taught. We're taught all sorts of deductive and inductive logic through our entire educational career. Everything we're taught is inductive and deductive logic, if you take it down to that. There's a third form of logic that we must use to innovate, which I think for many people feels like you're being kind of slipshod and you're not really being scientifically rigorous. But it's a form of logic that a wonderful, very wacky American pragmatist philosopher around the turn of the 20th century, Charles Sanders Peirce, declared to be abductive logic. What he said is that, among other things, no new idea in the history of the world has been proven analytically in advance. But there are new ideas in the world, and so what we have to understand is where those new ideas come from. They come from a third form of logic, which he called abductive logic, which he variously referred to as an inference to the best explanation or a logical leap of the mind. Now we heard, again, back to John and his story last night, we heard about the wacky ex-vet, then MD, with his methodology for helping somebody in John's condition be able to have kids that he brought from the world of animals, helping pandas do this. Now, he couldn't prove anything in advance. If John said, "Prove to me, doctor, that you can do this," right, he would have had no chance of doing that. But was what that vet turned doctor who helped John produce 4 of his children, was he being completely illogical, unscientific? No, it's just a different form of logic. Right? He saw a similar situation. Was it the same situation? Could he prove it was the same situation? No. A similar situation, a set of conditions for which this might work, a logical leap of the mind. And that form of logic is the only form of logic that will produce new ideas. And similarly, right, so all those doctors who said the inductive and deductive logic says you cannot never have children, we're sure. The abductive logic says, well, maybe, here's a possibility. Right? And even after that, right, there was the child, for those of you who weren't there last night, child number 5, which came not by artificial insemination, and that also was declared to be impossible, but once again, the logical leap of the mind gets you to a place that enables you to produce a result to invent the future. Now, I think we self-limit on this front. Organizationally, we are now in a mode of thinking that to be scientific means never straying from the notion of using inductive and deductive logic. But of course, to be scientific, I often say, remember where the scientific method starts, right? It starts with what? Does it start with analysis? No, it doesn't start with analysis. It starts with a hypothesis. Where did that hypothesis come from? A logical leap of the mind. Let's not forget that. In fact, that is absolutely essential to having an innovation culture that respects the logical leap of the mind, that gets you a hypothesis upon which you can analyze and demonstrate. And surely, now, John and his success of having 5 children starts to demonstrate for those who want to be scientific about it that this is indeed possible, and we can do a bunch more experiments and get to the point where it's proven. But the initial insight had nothing to do with being scientific in the way that I think we've come to believe we have to be scientific. And Larry last night talked about how we need to think differently when we're trying to improve something versus trying to innovate or create something. And this is, I think, the key lesson. The key lesson is that if we're trying to just hone and refine what we currently know to be the case, let's be analytical. Let's be very analytical. Let's be very logical, inductive and deductively logical. But if we're actually trying to invent something, we have to think in a different fashion. And Larry, my friend, my absolutely brilliant friend, the only thing I might disagree a little bit with is he presented a view of how he sees the world and hot spots going forward, important ways, important convergences in the way the world is going to work, and showed some for the world of medicine. The only thing I would quibble with there is, Larry said, I can prove this. And I would say, I don't think so. And I think it's part of the absolute brilliance of Larry that he is imagining a future that does not now exist and is not, in fact, provable. And that is the highest form of innovation and creativity. But I think because the world believes that you have to prove things in advance to do them, we want to play up the degree to which it's proof. I mean, that's a reflection of the world in which we operate. We're forced to try and make things sound analytical, scientific, and provable. It's just not helpful to innovation. It's damaging to innovation. It's an innovation killer. Now, there are many scientists in this room, and the thing that I would say to you is, you're all children of the first great scientists. Our scientific traditions stem from one guy, thousands of years ago, Aristotle, who wrote the Amazon #1 bestseller of about 350 BC, Analytica Posteriora, where he laid out the fundamentals of the scientific method for the first time, and about causation and the like. And we've followed that tradition for these thousands of years to come up with this very, very scientifically driven view of the world. And it's been responsible for much advance. But we've forgotten, I believe, an important message that Aristotle sent us. And this gets in part to Larry's point of the distinction between when we're trying to improve something versus trying to create something. But Aristotle said at the end of that treatise, which is one of the most important books written in the history of the world, but has been, I think, almost entirely forgotten, is he said, this whole book and this whole method I'm giving you is a method for the part of the world in which things cannot be other than they are. A lovely turn of phrase, whoever translated it, who knows what it was in Greek, but the part of the world where things cannot be other than they are, right? By which he meant, right, an oak tree is an oak tree and it can't be anything other than an oak tree. A piece of granite is a piece of granite. It can't be anything other than a piece of granite. Fair enough. So that entire scientific method, right, that he laid out the foundations of, that were honed and refined through the Renaissance. But he said, for the other part of the world where things can be other than they are, don't use this. Right? Don't use this. So the number one scientist in the history of the world who created the methodologies that we all used says, be careful, do not use this methodology that I'm telling you about in situations where things can be other than they are. And he wrote a whole other book on that called Rhetoric, where he said, in this part of the world, we get to understanding through conversation, interaction, exchange of ideas, where we actually build something that does not now exist. Right? So the doctors told John that you're in the part of the world where things cannot be other than they are, and you aren't going to have children, my friend. They weren't quite right. And I'm not criticizing them for being wrong. We're all wrong. I'm wrong at least several times a day. But what I think they were failing to do is make the distinction that Aristotle asked us to make, which is, are we looking at something where things can be other than they are, i.e. a world in which we want to innovate, or are we looking at a part of the world where things cannot be other than they are? And that's a judgment call. But what I think, when we get into the most trouble in our life on the planet here, is when we declare something to be in the first category and extrapolate the future based on the past by being analytical, and don't imagine the future. Right? And of course, John's mother would not be with us if we were in the first category on that front. She is, because her great surgeon here at the Mayo imagined that things could be other than they are. It looks like there is no hope, but it could be otherwise. So if in your organization and in your daily life you censor yourself in use of the words prove it, rather than censor yourself in thinking about and imagining what might be that does not now exist, you will produce more innovation. After your logical leap of the mind, go experiment, try things, give it a whirl, figure out whether actually your ideas are any good or not. But don't censor your ideas up front because you think you have to prove things in advance. You can't. You can only prove something new through the passage of time. All new ideas are only demonstrated to be valid through the passage of time. Give your ideas a chance, give them the passage of time to try, and we will have much more innovation. Over to you, John. Thank you.